In the beginning, the race that would become the Necrons began their existence under a fearsome, scourging star, billions of years before mankind evolved on Terra. Assailed at every moment by solar winds and radiation storms, the flesh and blood Necrontyr became a morbid people, whose precarious lifespans were riven by constant loss. Their dynasties were founded on the anticipation of demise, and the living were thought of as no more than temporary residents hurrying through the sepulchres and tombs of their ancestors. Unable to find peace on their own planet, the Necrontyr blindly groped out towards other worlds. Using stasis crypts aboard slow-burning torch ships, they began to colonize other planets. Little by little, the Necrontyr dynasties spread ever further, until much of the galaxy answered to their rule. As time wore on, further strife came to the Necrontyr. As their territory grew ever wider and more diverse, the unity that had made them strong was eroded, and bitter wars were raged as entire realms fought to win independence. Ultimately, the Triarch, the ruling council of the Necrontyr, realized the only hope of unity lay in conflict with an external enemy. But there were few who could prove a credible threat. Only the Old Ones, first of all the galaxy's sentient life, were a prospective foe great enough to bind the Necrontyr to a common cause. Such a war was simplicity itself to justify, for the Necrontyr had ever rankled at the Old Ones' refusal to share the secrets of eternal life. So did the Triarch declare war upon the Old Ones. At the same time, they offered amnesty to any successionist dynasties who willingly returned to the fold. Thus, lured by the spoils of victory and the promise of immortality, the separatist realms abandoned rebellion and the war in heaven began. The terrible campaigns that followed could fill a library in their own right, but the underlying truth was a simple one: the Necrontyr could never win. Their superior numbers and technologies were constantly outmaneuvered by the Old Ones' mastery of the webway portals. In but a span of centuries, the Necrontyr were pushed back until they were little more than an irritation, a quiescent peril clinging to the isolated and forgotten worlds. In the face of defeat, the unity of the Necrontyr began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the disparate dynasties. Scores of generations had now lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many Necrontyr dynasties would have gladly sued for peace had the ruling Triarch permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the Wars of Secession, more widespread and ruinous than any that had come before. So fractured had the Necrontyr dynasties become by then that, had the Old Ones been so inclined, they could have wiped them out with ease. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarch searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered, though the price would be incalculably high. It was during the reign of Zarek that the godlike energy beings known as the Catan first blighted the Necrontyr. It is impossible to say for certain how the Necrontyr first came to encounter the Catan, though many misleading, contradictory, and one-sided accounts of these events exist. The dusty archives of Solomus claim it was but an accident, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Book of Mournful Night held under close guard in the Black Library's innermost sanctum, tells rather that the raw hatred that the Necron held for the Old Ones sang out across space, acting as a beacon the Catan could not ignore. Howsoever contact occurred, the shadow of the Catan fell over the oldest dynasties first. Some Necron actively sought the Catan's favour and oversaw the forging of living metal bodies to contain the Star God's nebulous essence. Thus clad, the Catan took the shape of the Necron half-forgotten gods, hiding their own desires beneath cloaks of obsequious subservience. So it was that one of the Catan came before the Silent King, acting as forerunner to the coming of his brothers. Amongst its own kind, this Catan was known as the Deceiver, for it was willfully treacherous. Yet the Silent King knew not the Catan's true nature, and instead granted the creature an audience. The Deceiver spoke of a war, fought long before the birth of the Necron between the Catan and the Old Ones. It was a war, he said, that the Catan had lost. In the aftermath, and fearing the vengeance of the Old Ones, he and his brothers had hidden themselves away, hoping one day to find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to account. In return for aid, the Deceiver assured he and his brothers would deliver everything that the Necron craved. Unity could be theirs once again, and the immortality that they had sought for so long would be finally within their grasp. No price would there be for these great gifts, the Deceiver insisted, for they were but boons to be bestowed upon valued allies. Thus did the Deceiver speak, and who can say how much of his tale was truth? It is doubtful whether even the Deceiver knew, for trickery had become so much a part of his existence that even he could no longer divine its root. Yet his words held sway over Sarek, who, like his ancestors before him, despaired of the divisions that were tearing his people apart. For long months he debated the matter with the Triarch and the nobles of his royal court. Through it all, the only dissenting voice was that of Orican, the court astrologer, who foretold that the alliance would bring about a renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the soul of the Necron people. Yet desire and ambition swiftly overrode caution, and Orican's prophecy was dismissed. A year after the Deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and so forever doomed their race. With the pact between Necron and Catan sealed, the Star Gods revealed the form that immortality would take, and the great biotransference began. Colossal biofurnaces roared day and night, consuming weak-bodied flesh and replacing it with enduring forms of living metal. As the Cyclopean machines clamoured, the Catan swarmed about the biotransference sites, drinking in the torrent of cast-off life energy and growing ever stronger. As Sarek watched the Catan feast on the life essence of his people, he realised the terrible depth of his mistake. In many ways, he felt better than he had in decades, the countless aches and uncertainties of organic life now behind him. His new machine body was far mightier than the frail form he had tolerated for so long, and his thoughts were swifter and clearer than they had ever been. Yet there was an emptiness gnawing at his mind, an inexpressible hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that the price of physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow, the Silent King beheld the fate he had brought upon his people. The Necron were now but a memory, and the soulless Necrons reborn in their place. Yet, if the price had been steep, biotransference had fulfilled all of the promises that the Catan had made. Even the lowliest of Necron tier was blessed with immortality. Age and radiation could little erode their bodies, and only the most terrible of injuries could destroy them utterly. Likewise, the Necrons enjoyed a unity that the Necron tier had never known, though it was achieved through tyranny rather than consent. The biotransference process had embedded command protocols in every mind, granting Sarek the unswerving loyalty of his subjects. At first, the Silent King embraced this anonymity, for it was a welcome reprieve from the chaos of recent years. However, as time wore on, he grew weary of his burden, but dared not sever the command protocols lest his subjects turn on him, seeking vengeance for the terrible curse he had visited upon them. With the Catan and the Necrons fighting as one, the Old Ones were now doomed to defeat. Glutted on the life force of the Necron tier, the empowered Catan were nigh unstoppable and unleashed forces beyond comprehension. Planets were razed, suns extinguished, and whole systems devoured by black holes called into being by the reality-warping powers of the Star Gods. Necron legions finally breached the webway and assailed the Old Ones in every corner of the galaxy. They brought under siege the fortresses of the Old Ones' allies, harvesting the life force of the defenders to feed their masters. Ultimately, beset by the implacable onset of the Catan and the calamitous warp-spawned perils they had themselves mistakenly unleashed, the Old Ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Throughout the final stages of the War in Heaven, Zarek bided his time, waiting for the moment in which the Catan would be vulnerable. Though the entire Necron race was his to command, he could not hope to oppose the Catan at the height of their power. And even if he did and met with success, the Necrons would then have to finish the war in Heaven alone. No, the Old Ones had to be defeated before the Catan could be brought to account for the horror they had wrought. And so when the Catan finally won their great war, their triumph was short-lived. With one hated enemy finally defeated and the other spent from hard-fought victory, the Silent King at last led the Necrons in revolt. In their arrogance, the Catan did not realise their danger until it was too late. The Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons too mighty for even the Catan to endure. Alas, the Catan were immortal starspawn, part of the fundamental fabric of actuality, and therefore nigh impossible to destroy. So was each Catan instead, sundered into thousands of fragments. Yet this was sufficient to the Silent King's goals. Indeed, he had known the Catan's ultimate destruction to be impossible, and drawn his plans accordingly. Each Catan shard was bound within a tesseract labyrinth, as trammelled and secure as a genie in a bottle. Though the cost of victory was high, millions had been destroyed as a consequence of rebellion, including all of the Triarch save the Silent King himself. The Necrons were once more in command of their own destiny. Yet even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Catan alike, the Silent King saw that the time of the Necrons was over. For the moment at least, the mantle of galactic dominion would soon pass to the Eldar, a race who had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout the War in Heaven and had thus come to hate the Necrons and all their works. The Eldar had survived where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, weakened during the overthrow of the Catan, could not stand against them. Yet the Silent King knew that the time of the Eldar would pass, as did the time of all flesh. So it was that the Silent King ordered the remaining Necron cities to be transformed into great tomb complexes threaded with stasis crypts. Let the Eldar shape the galaxy for a time. They were but ephemeral, whilst the Necrons were eternal. The Silent King's final command to his people was that they must sleep for 60 million years but awake ready to rebuild all that they had lost, to restore the dynasties to their former glory. Thus was the Silent King's last order, and as the last Tomb World sealed its vaults, he destroyed the command protocols by which he had controlled his people, for he had failed them utterly. Without a backward glance, Sarek, last of the Silent Kings, took his ship into the blackness of intergalactic space, there to find whatever measure of solace or penance he could. Meanwhile, eons passed, and the Necrons slept on. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, then please be sure to like and subscribe, or even leave a comment. I always try my best to reply to them all. You can even now support the channel by joining the Patreon page, details of which are in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and always remember to drill your barrels.